Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 10. The descent to the surface was nerve-wracking. The formation consisted of 12 transports escorted by close to 100 F-55 Dark Stars, and everyone was on edge. The Deimos fighters had proved lethal, and the UEF's marine and naval fighters had been stretched to maintain air superiority and protect vital supply flights. Stalker was perched behind the two pilots. A glance behind him into the forward cargo hold revealed that it was stacked to the roof with military supplies of every type. As they descended into the lower atmosphere, the tension mounted. Every supply run up until this point bin had met with resistance, and no one was expecting this one to be any different. Stalker had connected his EEA to the transport's comm system and listened intently to the TACnet. Green Leader, this is Monsoon Control. This is Green Leader. Go ahead, Monsoon. Be advised we have possible bandits along your flight path. Bearing 180, range 1200, all received Monsoon. Green Leader to a flight. Push ahead 180 and intercept bandits, weapons hot. All receive Green Leader, breaking loose. Green Leader to Mule 776. Mule receiving send. Mule divert to 150 and drop to Nap of the Earth. All receive Green Leader, taking the paint off. Stalker felt his stomach churn as the transports raced for the ground, following the fighter flight commander's orders to switch from high altitude to NOE, or Nap of the Earth, which meant low-level high-speed flying using the terrain to avoid detection. The transports screamed to Earth, pulling up moments before the possibility of a fiery impact with the onrushing ground. Despite it being near midday local time, it looked almost like twilight on Earth, the whole landscape appearing dim and shadowy. The low-light conditions, however, proved no problem for the pilots with their night vision systems, or for Stalker with his EEA's automatic vision enhancement. They flew low and fast, lifting up slightly to clear rocky outcrops. Stalker surveyed the terrain as it flashed by with a military tactician's eye. The surrounding country was largely flat and sandy, but here and there were rocky outcrops and depressions of varying sizes. Some appeared huge, possibly the remnants of ancient meteor showers. All in all, Stalker noted a distinct lack of available cover. This would make it a battle of two possible flavors, either an entrenched static defense on what high ground could be found, or a battle of fire and maneuver in open ground. From what he had been able to find out prior to deploying, Stalker knew that the entire Terra Nova and Immortals assault divisions had been committed to the surface. That included both the division's formidable Strider recon units and their mechanized transport companies, and if Stalker knew Alpha One, he preferred being in the saddle to lying in the dirt. Stalker's concentration was broken as the TACnet again lit up with activity. The fighters had met the enemy, and a close-range dogfight had developed, what the fighter pilots referred to as a furball. With both sides using stealthy aircraft, the detection distance had dropped to sometimes almost visual range, making engagements sudden and vicious. The TACnet had become a running litany of carnage as the fighters of both sides did their dance in the darkened sky. Green 6 is bust. Switching to guns. Shit, there's hundreds of them. Cut the chatter, Green 4. Green 12 bogey on your 6, break right. Splash 1. Green 15 is hit. Anyone see a shoot? Negative, no shoot. Someone get this bastard off me. Switching to... Static suddenly filled the airwaves. The transport's pilots switched to the alternate frequency, but got nothing, so they switched to the local commnet. This is Mule Lead to all mules. Navigate to 175. Look for beacons at 20. They were nearing the Terra Nova's front line, and moments later the pilots saw the strobe beacon. The beacon was only visible to the transport's sensors, and as one the 12 transports landed with a slight thud on the rocky ground. Stalker was already at the side access door and hit the ground before the door even finished opening, the dust swirling around him in the gloom. Stalker took stock of the surrounding area. They had landed on the crest of a long, low-flowing slope, a rolling valley of sand and rocks extending beyond into the distance. Nearby were several loggers of black-painted armored vehicles, Stalker recognizing their squat shape as diamond-scale infantry fighting vehicles. The diamond-scale IFV had been developed after the experiences of the Martian insurrection, when lighter armored vehicles had proved too vulnerable for the intense close-range combat encountered during service with the assault divisions. The result of the hard-won combat experience was the Diamond Scale, a heavily armored IFV based on a Devastator/Assassin tank chassis. The Diamond Scale had the same advanced heavy armor as the tanks it was based on, as well as the same advanced defensive systems. It could carry a 6-man subunit wearing full EEA in relative comfort across the roughest terrain at speed and deliver them into the heart of the action, with room for a 7th in a turret observation position, as well as the vehicle's 3 crew. It also possessed an upgraded multi-turret lifted directly from the successful Ironhide IFV, complete with its lethal array of weapons. The Diamond Scales had now replaced all the Ironhides and most of the Warthog APCs in the assault divisions, the old vehicles being transferred to other divisions, a task made easier by the heavy losses in equipment suffered by UEA armored units during the Mars campaign. To Stalker, the Diamond Scales looked like sleeping dragons, all menace, and he felt the thrill that only combat could bring begin to seep into his body. Despite all the ghastliness of war that he had experienced, there was still something about the prospect of it, something instinctual that made it exciting. Around the Diamond Scales were numerous other vehicles, including Warthog APCs, Dune Raider trail bikes, and towering above everything else like Sentinels were several of the Terra Nova's elite recon striders. Moving purposefully around the vehicles were hundreds of black armored soldiers, dozens of them rushing to the transports to begin manhandling the supplies off. Stalker strode up to a nearby 9th Terra Nova unit commander who was coordinating the unloading from the transports he had arrived on. "Specialist, where can I find the 2nd? The man looked up and studied him for a moment, clearly surprised to see someone carrying the insignia of a 2nd Terra Nova battle commander, not knowing where his own regiment was. "The 2nd is about 5 clicks further down the line, Commander. Any idea how I can get there?" "If you see the IC in charge, I'm sure he can get you there. He's at the 5th Regiment CP, by those striders." Stalker thanked the man and moved off towards a command post, which turned out to be a command Warthog, distinguishable from a standard version by its myriads of aerials and rotating comms array in place of its 15mm machine gun turret. The 5th Regiment's assault commander looked up from where he was seated with his staff around a glowing hollow chart. "Commander, where did you come from?" "Just got back from Ross 154, trying to find my command. Any idea where I can find the 21st Company?" The assault commander and his staff regarded Stalker's battered-looking armor for a moment before answering. "2nd Regiment is a few clicks down the line. You can catch a lift with the supply run if you like. Be heading that way in about 30 minutes. "That would be most appreciated, Specialist. May I inquire as to the situation?" "Take a seat. We were just about to get into a briefing for the upcoming op." Stalker planted himself on an ammo crate, and the briefing got underway without further delay, all attention turning to the hollow display. "All right, intel suggests that the Deimos will hit us again within the next few hours. So far, their tactics have been to consistently attempt to outflank us. This may have failed up to this point, but it has pushed us back over 30 kilometers and spread us out. Between us and the Immortals, we now hold a combined front of almost 40 kilometers. The simple fact is that we can't maintain our current positions. So beginning with the Immortals on our right, we will perform a staged fallback and shorten our lines." "Excuse me, Commander. Do we have any idea of the enemy's strength?" The assault commander turned to Stalker. "The simple answer is no, but a lot comes to mind. They have hit us an average of 3 times a day with coordinated air and ground assaults since we deployed." "What sort of equipment are they using?" "So far, we have encountered few mecha. Some smaller types have been reported, possibly striders, but mostly their ground forces are infantry and sliders." "Sliders? It's what the men call them. There is some type of IFV that appears to use a magnetic hover system." "Magnetic hover? We have been playing around with that for years and couldn't make it work." "That's right. The Deimos seem to have it perfected. Sliders are a nasty bit of gear. 2 side-mounted heavy-caliber twin autocannons that can engage both ground or air targets, and a molded turret with twin missile launchers that lowers into the hull when not in use. And they also carry around 10 Deimos warriors. Heavy armor has also been reported in other systems, but so far, we haven't seen any here yet. Stalker listened intently for the rest of the briefing. The Deimos assaults were always preceded by heavy shelling using some type of plasma-based explosive shells. For this reason, the assault divisions had quickly decided against static tactics and had remained relatively mobile. The enemy guns had been targeted by friendly self-propelled artillery, SPAs, although the heavier Deimos weapons outranged those used by the Terra Nova and Immortals. The main problem was proving to be the Deimos air power, which was lethal. The Deimos aircraft strafed exposed armored vehicles with some type of quick-firing rail weapon, precision cluster munitions, and scatter lasers. Stalker excused himself just before the end of the briefing as he saw the ammunition carriers were getting ready to depart, jumping on the lead vehicle as they rolled out of the logger. Stalker climbed up on top of a Warthog ammo carrier, sitting next to the open-top hatch, and chatted to a lean-looking 9th Regiment soldier. The convoy moved parallel to the front line, vehicles peeling off to distribute ammunition and supplies as they went. It never ceased to impress Stalker the firepower which the assault divisions wielded. The numbers of black armored men and vehicles seemed without limit. Stalker saw a number of batteries of 12 Zeus SBAs sitting quietly in the gloom as they passed, their long barrels pointing towards the distant enemy, only their turret-mounted radars showing movement as they rotated tirelessly. All along the line, men and machines were gearing up for action, preparing to execute the pullback order once the word came that the Immortals had completed their scheduled withdrawal. Stalker also saw several Terra Nova Striders fully powered up and ready for action, their ion thrusters glowing in the gloom. All in all, Stalker had to admit it was a wonderful sight. After what seemed like only moments, the Terra Nova trooper informed Stalker that this was his stop, the Warthog slowing. Thanking him for the lift, Stalker jumped lightly from the rolling vehicle. As his feet touched the ground, raising small clouds of dust, the Warthog immediately sped up and headed further down the line, while a vehicle at the end of the convoy pulled over, men running to meet it and redistribute the supplies. Stalker immediately spied a tall, lanky figure giving orders. The man's build and the long eliminator rifle he had slung over his shoulder were unmistakable. Stalker saw Link freeze as he spotted him, and for a moment the two men stood still in amongst the hurrying men. "It's good to see you, boss." Stalker activated his comm net. "It's good to be back, Link." Stalker gripped Link's hand in a crushing grip, which Link returned with gusto. "Always knew you would turn up, boss. Takes more than a few aliens and intergalactic war to get rid of me, Link. How are the lads?" Link glanced at the growing crowd of men around them. "The bunch of girls refused to believe that you were dead. They wanted to go off on some half-cocked crazy rescue mission and search the system for your pod." Stalker laughed. "Well, that wouldn't have worked. I didn't get off the Artemis in a pod, I walked." There was a confused silence, the group clearly not understanding what he meant. "I stayed with the ship. There were some women there, nice-looking Navy types, so I had to let them have the last pod." A ripple of laughter came from the surrounding group, but Link remained serious. "You mean you went down with the Artemis?" "Sure did. Was the wildest ride of my life. Spent it in a damn freezer, would you believe?" Stalker proceeded to give them a brief rundown of his escape from the Artemis, events at the colony, and eventual escape back to friendly lines. By the end, there was a hushed respect from the men around him. Their already considerable respect for their CO increased to new heights. "That's incredible." Stalker turned to the man who had spoken. "You know how it is, just a walk in the park for a commander of a Terra Nova company." Pressing matters soon broke up the little reunion, and the men went back to getting ready to redeploy, the story of their CEO's miraculous survival spreading like wildfire through the division. "Well, what are my orders, sir?" Stalker looked at Link, detecting a hidden mirth in his tone. "Well, that was easy. I thought I was going to have to win an arm wrestle or outshoot you on the range to get my command back. It was always your company, boss. I was just minding it for you. Besides, I would have beaten you in both." Stalker slapped his friend on the back. "You're a good man, Link. Yeah, I know." Stalker laughed again. "Glad to know you're not wallowing in self-modesty." Stalker looked around at his company. They were almost ready to move, having piled into diamond scales from the 93rd Terra Nova, one of the division's mechanized transport companies. "Well, Link, shall we get this show on the road? We were just waiting for you, boss. Now you're finally here. If you have no objections, I'll get the men in the saddle. Make it so, Link." Stalker watched as Link morphed from his friend into his 2IC and began to bark out orders. "Damn, it's good to be back." Stalker boarded a diamond scale, climbing up and into the observation position next to the vehicle's commander. Link and the rest of the 21st Company CCU were in separate vehicles. This meant that there was less chance of them all being killed than if they were all in the same vehicle, and it took a penetrating hit. Stalker waited patiently for the vehicle commander to get the order to move, the still air filled with the noise of dozens of idling engines. "Alpha 2-1 Mobile, this is Top Hat Control. This is 2-1 Mobile. Go ahead, Top Hat. Green light. Say again, green light." "All received, Top Hat. 2-1 is green light." All around, the dull grumble of the vehicle engines suddenly became a roar as the 21st Company moved out, the lines of bulky black IFVs advancing in line abreast across the flat terrain to the rear of the old front line. The new phase line was some 25 kilometers behind the old front line and would shorten the front by half, allowing the divisions to concentrate their defense and reinforce their flanks. Stalker listened to the TAC net as he was rocked about by the diamond scale as it churned ahead with surprising speed for such a large vehicle. One by one, the Terra Nova's companies were reporting underway, the Immortals having completed their pullback during the previous few hours. The greatest risk to the operation was that the Deimos would hit them as they were redeploying, a move that made tactical sense. It was an attack that Stalker would have launched if he had been in the position of a Deimos commander. Stalker was still wondering where the Deimos were and what they were planning when the TAC net suddenly came alive and the horizon lit up with flashes, long streaks of tracer fire arcing skyward. The news came in fast. To the right, the next regiment in line, the 5th Terra Nova, was being hit hard. They were on the end of the Terra Nova line and held the division's right flank. During the Immortals' withdrawal, a small gap had inadvertently opened up between the two divisions, and the Deimos were hitting the breach with everything they had, including both ground forces and coordinated air attacks. They were trying to split the front by forcing the gap apart and separating the two assault divisions. Reports coming in from the breach were dire. Deimos forces were continuing to pour into the area of the breach, only held back by a few scattered units. Stalker made a snap decision. The breach had to be held, and if possible sealed. Otherwise, the divisions could be split and rolled up by the superior numbers of the Deimos forces. "Alpha 2-2, this is Alpha 2-1. Over, this is 2-2, go ahead. 2-2, can you extend your line with 2-3 to cover my position? 2-1 will redeploy to aid Alpha 5. Roger 2-1, Wilco. Thanks 2-2, 2-1 out." Thinning the line was a risk, but Stalker considered it a risk worth taking. The 21st Terra Nova halted, and as one, the 32 diamond scales that were carrying the company turned 90 degrees and headed towards the growing sounds of battle. As they maneuvered, Stalker was glad that his company was back to near full strength. Despite its losses at Altair, new replacements had been forthcoming from Earth in recent days, some of whom had been allocated to the weakened 2nd Regiment. As they moved towards the 5th Terra Nova's positions, the sound of battle grew still fiercer. The entire horizon seemed to be on fire from a rolling thunderstorm of explosions. Stalker directed his company slightly south, so they moved parallel to the front. As well as hitting the hole in the line, the Deimos were hitting the entire 5th Regiment to pin them down. Stalker wanted to avoid being caught up in that battle and instead get to the breach. From his position on top of the diamond scale, Stalker kept a good eye on the front to his left, now being close enough to see the flash of heavy guns and hear the clatter of autocannons. They tore past the battery of Zeus SBA Stalker had seen earlier. All were in action, their heavy 203mm tubes glowing from the heat of constant use. The sound of the heavy guns firing adding a deep bass to the crescendo of battle that seemed all around. As they passed the stationary 20th Terra Nova at the end of the 2nd Regiment's lines, Stalker saw some of their diamond scales lurch into life and hurry to join his convoy. From a stationary diamond scale, The 20th's battle commander threw Stalker a distant salute. "Good luck 2-1. Give them hell." Stalker crisply returned the gesture of respect. Clearly, he had heard Stalker's orders to his men over the TAC net, and Stalker was grateful for the extra men and vehicles. 20th Terra Nova's commander was taking a risk weakening his own company to aid in Stalker's impromptu counterattack, a risk Stalker appreciated, and he made a mental note to thank him once the battle was over. "If either of us survives," Stalker reminded himself. Stalker waited until they were directly behind the area of the breach before ordering a change in direction. The column of diamond scales turned, now directly facing the battlefront. Stalker had heard from the running commentary on the TACnet that both the Immortals and 5th Terra Nova had thrown anything they could spare into the breach to slow the attack. Those forces were now being overrun. They needed help, and they needed it immediately. Stalker looked around him. There were now close to 50 diamond scales spread out in one long line, all waiting for his command. "This is Alpha 2-1 to all units. Assault speed advance." As one, the diamond scales leapt off the line and tore across the gloomy plain, charging straight at the battle several kilometers distant. "This is Alpha 2-1 to any friendly forces in Sector Omega. Check fire to your rear. Friendly forces inbound. Repeat, check fire to your rear." Stalker got no reply and peered ahead of his charging troops. There were numerous vehicles moving on the horizon, too many to count, and around them the air was filled with green energy fire, which was being answered by diminishing amounts of blue impulse fire. "Enemy in sight, Commander." Without looking at the vehicle commander, Stalker calmly gave the order. "All units are weapons free. Fire at will." There was a whoosh from close to Stalker's head, and a corkscrew anti-armor missile streaked away, dozens of others hot on its heels from the other vehicles. A few seconds later, a second volley issued from the charging diamond scales, reaching out across the void to destroy enemy vehicles still kilometers distant. There were numerous flashes followed by the fireballs of secondary explosions as the missiles began to find their marks. Having fired half of their complement of 4 missiles in the first 2 volleys, the crews of the diamond scales followed doctrine and switched to their long-range armor-piercing pulse rifles. Capable of firing 1 round every second with great accuracy, the diamond scales lit up the battlefield with a wall of red pulse rifle fire, the deadly shots tearing across the distance like red bolts of lightning. The initial shock was total. Scores of Deimos sliders lay burning, the remnants of the defenders taking heart at the sudden destruction wrought upon their attackers. Stalker was suddenly thrown to one side as the vehicle swerved violently, a long burst of heavy shells passing just feet above his head. The diamond scales turret swung, and red shots lanced out in reply. Several missiles also streaked towards the charging 21st Company, but all were intercepted by the IFV's automated close-in defenses. As they approached the front still at full speed, Stalker was amazed at the damage they had done. What looked like hundreds of enemy vehicles had been destroyed, the fires of burning vehicles dotted across the terrain. The Deimos had managed to break through the front line, and Stalker realized they had arrived just in time, with many of the vehicles they had destroyed having already pushed through the gap. Stalker caught glimpses of the burning hulks as they flew past, the unmistakable shape and design marking them as Deimos sliders. All at once, Deimos seemed to rise out of the ground itself like wraiths, dozens of them jumping up from their hiding spots and opening up with furious fire on the passing diamond scales. Most of the incoming rounds were intercepted by the IFV's defenses, but Stalker saw several diamond scales take hits from some type of close-ranged anti-armor weapon and grind to a halt, smoke billowing from impact points. Stalker realized that they couldn't leave the enemy infantry behind them. There were too many to ignore. 21st dismount, sweep, and clear. The diamond scales skidded to a halt, throwing up dust, their rear ramps lowering before they had fully halted, and the 6 soldiers each carried charged-out firing as they came. The air around the now halted IFVs instantly turned blue from the intensity of the fire the assault troops poured into the enemy, a brutal, close-ranged battle quickly developing. Stalker loosed several bursts at running Deimos before scrambling out of the observer's position and ungracefully sliding down the side of the big armored vehicle and landing in the dust. Stalker just had time to bring up his rifle when he saw a Deimos rise up and fire, a blur of greenish light passing with an audible hiss just inches from his head before impacting with a shower of sparks on the armored side of the diamond scale. Stalker squeezed off a burst. The tall alien crumpled at the impacts and dropped from sight. The dismounting Terra Nova men were met by a wave of Deimos from every direction, the tall aliens leaping up from where they had been lying prone on the ground. The exchange of fire was short and sharp, and in some places quickly turned into hand-to-hand fighting as the Deimos rushed the dismounting infantry. Stalker was lost in the heat of the firefight. With robotic precision and silky smooth speed, he stood his ground and dropped anything that moved, only pausing to slam home a fresh magazine as he ran dry, the empty magazine falling to the ground and going skittering off his armored boot, lost amongst the chaotic fighting. The air itself seemed to be alive with flying projectiles, while over their heads the diamond scales continued to pour pulse rifle fire at distant enemy vehicles, and here and there the crumps of frag grenades added to the raging noise. There was little to no cover in the open terrain, and the Deimos immediately around the IFVs were rapidly cut down by a hail of lethally accurate impulse fire. As the firing died away, Deimos bodies lay in piles around the vehicles, while sporadic bursts of enemy fire continued to come from every point of the compass. Stalker noticed several of his own men lying alongside the Deimos in the dust as the tempo of impulse fire began to die down. There was no time to mourn their loss. It was time to move. Stalker switched to the comm net. All units mount up, push forward to the front line. Assault troops are dying. Let's go. The men quickly reboard the diamond scales, dragging their wounded with them, some opting to simply clamber on top. With an explosion of revs, the IFVs lurched forward, resuming the charge into the intense fighting at the still distant front line. Stalker had given his orders. Now he had to trust in his unit commanders to get the job done. The advance to what remained of the front line was more than 2 kilometers over relatively flat ground, broken only by small outcrops of rock and the wrecks of destroyed armored vehicles. Harassing fire continued to come from every direction, and behind every small clump of rock or wrecked vehicle a Deimos seemed to be lying prone ready to fire on the passing IFVs. The charging line of machines pushed all before them, the scattered Deimos emerging like flush quail before the hunters. The diamond scale's multi-turrets continued to pour destruction, their fire enhanced by the blue bolts of impulse fire from their passengers, anything not human that moved being ruthlessly eliminated. To Stalker, the advance felt like the longest of his life, and covering the remaining distance seemed to stretch out impossibly despite the speed with which diamond scales moved. As they approached the front, the level of destruction and the bitterness of the fighting became clear. The ground was littered with destroyed vehicles, many of them painted the black of the Terra Nova and the dark gray of the Immortals. All at once the ground seemed to drop away, and from his position on top of the diamond scale, Stalker could now see that the defenders were holding a low ridge line, the ground dropping away slightly beyond into a vast shallow valley. The ridgeline was a twisted mass of torn-up ground, shell craters, and wrecked vehicles. Beyond in the valley, Stalker could see hundreds of moving vehicles. There were neat formations of sliders, and there were smaller formations of some type of tank. They were slightly smaller than the massive Devastators and Assassin tanks used by the UEDF and employed the same magnetic hover technology used by the sliders. Stalker saw one fire. The bright blast was unmistakable. Each was armed with a lethal long-barreled railgun. Closer to the ridgeline, an intense firefight was underway as Deimos infantry pushed up the slope using wreckage and shell holes as cover, moving in rushes with startling speed. To the left and right of the ridgeline, the fighting was equally fierce, and the flashes of artillery impacts were accompanied by a constant rolling thunder. Stalker took one look at the situation and knew that they weren't going to be able to hold the ridge. The Deimos formations were simply too strong. Any attempt to hold it would end in the 21st Terra Nova being overrun and annihilated. Stalker came to a quick decision. 2-1 mobile hold position and provide overwatch. 2-1 dismount and secure survivors for evac. The diamond scales halted with a jolt, the men jumping down and heading forward at a run. Stalker saw a dusty-looking Terra Nova soldier jog to meet him from a nearby crater. The man wore the insignia of a 53rd Terra Nova unit commander and was furiously reloading his ASBR as he approached. Stalker also noted that the crater the man had come from was surrounded by Deimos bodies. The man grasped Stalker's hand, speaking breathlessly. "Damn, it's good to see you, Specialist. Good to be here. Where's your CO? Dead. Looks like you're in command. All 3 company commanders in the area were killed in the first assault. Those bastards tore straight through us. Didn't even stop to finish us off. How many are you?" "Just my company and a few from the 20th, minus the casualties we took getting here." Stalker could almost feel the confusion in the man. "That's it? That's it, Specialist." Stalker realized the man was shaken, probably surprised to still be alive after the beating the positions had taken. Stalker shook off his own surprise. Sometimes he had to remember that even the elite members of the assault divisions were human. "Unit Commander, I want you to move along the line and help gather up the wounded. Get them into as many diamond scales as you need and get them out of here. They're your responsibility." The man nodded, his expression unfathomable behind his helmet. "All right, get on with it, Specialist." The man headed off with new energy, his concentration refocused on the task at hand, and keeping low hurried away. Stalker glanced along the line. On both sides, he could see black armored soldiers helping wounded while others continued to pour fire at the Deimos infantry, still pushing their way up the slope. The Terra Nova soldiers were piling up what cover they could, some looking virtually buried in the sand. The Deimos forces were pushing relentlessly closer. Stalker guessed they were the second wave designated to back up the breakthrough forces, the sliders passing easily over the torn-up earth due to their gravity propulsion. The diamond scales opened up with the last of their missiles, the spiraling corkscrews hurtling down the slope as they tried to buy time to get all the wounded on board. Stalker quickly realized it wouldn't be enough. They needed more time. The valley was coming alive with returning fire, hundreds of flashes issuing from the sliders and Deimos tanks as they opened up with rail, cannon, and missile fire, forcing the diamond scales to pull back beyond the crest after several took hits and were knocked out. Stalker looked at a display in the corner of his EEA helmet's HUD. The group of icons showed the status of the 7 members of the 21st Terra Nova CCU. All were green, meaning they were alive. Open channel, Spotlight. The verbal command opened a direct link to his company forward observer, CFO. "Spotlight, do you copy over?" The voice of the CFO came back crisp and clear. "Go ahead, Alpha 2-1. Spotlight, I want a fire mission on the enemy formations, whatever you can get me, and make it fast." "Roger that, Commander. I'm on it." Stalker turned his attention back to the advancing enemy, adding his ASBR fire to that of his men, while listening to the CFO calling in the artillery strike. "Sheldrake, this is Spotlight 2-1. After a moment, the Divisional Artillery Command replied, "Roger, Spotlight 2-1. This is Sheldrake. Go ahead." "Sheldrake, I have a priority fire mission. Enemy armor and infantry in the open, battalion strength, grid reference Omega Charlie 8. Over." "I'll receive, Spotlight. Standby, tasking." A moment later, the TAC net lit up again. "Spotlight 2-1, round out. Round out." Stalker waited, and after a moment heard the scream of a heavy shell, the 203mm round landing with a thud about 100 meters from the lead sliders. "Sheldrake, this is Spotlight 2-1. Push 200 and fire for effect. Repeat, push 200 and fire for effect. Infantry and armor in the open." Within moments, a great roar issued overhead, the distinctive sound of heavy shells ripping through the air. The first shell had been a standard high explosive, round to give the CFO a good spotting reference. The following shells comprising the strike itself were something very different. The large 203mm smart shells were anti-armor cluster shells, each shell containing over 150 individual armor-piercing bomblets. The shells were designed to detonate at around 100 feet above the target area and shower it with the lethal grenade-sized bomblets. each bomblet being powerful enough to kill a well-armored soldier or pierce the thinner top armor of most armored vehicles. As Stalker watched the shells tore in and detonated with devastating results, as countless explosions rippled across the Deimos formations in a wave. Dozens of Deimos vehicles ground to a halt, either crippled or having their crews killed, scores of Deimos infantry also being cut down by the whirlwind of lethal flying fragments. A ragged cheer rose from the assault troops as 3 more barges came in, each superbly directed by the CFO, sowing mayhem amongst the attacking Deimos. The salvos were all the divisional artillery could spare, with word coming over the TACnet that the Deimos had now opened up an offensive along the entire front, the guns being badly needed elsewhere. Even as the dust cleared, more sliders and Deimos warriors came up the slope to replace the ones destroyed and killed, their numbers and determination seemingly endless. As if in response to the strike, the Deimos artillery began to shell the ridgeline, the powerful plasma explosive shells landing with a bright flash like summer lightning, their impacts stomach-churning. Overhead, Deimos fighters also swooped, missiles, laser and rail fire pummeling the already churned-up earth, tracers from the remaining diamond scales chasing them as they whirled away skywards. It was time to go. Alpha 2-1 to all units. Mount up, withdraw, say again withdraw. As the impulse and slap anti-tank rocket fire died away, the Deimos came on with renewed fury, sensing victory. The sliders opening fire with airburst shells from their cannons, showing the retreating troops with superheated shards of razor-sharp metal. It was barely organized chaos, and Stalker knew it. He quickly mounted a diamond scale just as it began to reverse, as all along the line the battered remnants began to fall back. Stalker guessed there were about 30 diamond scales left, a handful having already departed with the wounded, while at least a dozen remained behind, wrecked on the ridgeline. The first slider emerging over the crest was riddled by pulse rifle fire from the retreating diamond scales and crashed aground as its power systems failed before spectacularly exploding. More and more kept coming and were soon joined by the running figures of Deimos warriors, running from cover to cover, firing as they moved. The diamond scales pulled back in reverse, keeping their well-armored fronts towards the enemy. Fortunately, they could go almost as fast in reverse as they could when traveling forwards, and the gap between them and the ridgeline began to open. Sunray 2, this is Alpha 2-1. Over. Stalker was relieved to hear D's booming voice come back loud and clear over the TACnet. Copy Alpha 2-1. This is Sunray 2. What's your situation? I'm in deep shit, Sunray. We're a Broken Arrow. Say again, Alpha 2-1 is Broken Arrow. We're pulling back from Zone Omega. Multiple casualties. We're being overrun. All received 2-1. Proceed to new phase line at best speed. I am routing support units to your location. Hang in there. Help is on way. Roger, Sunray. 2-1 is still in the fight. Thank for the assist. As the first Deimos gravity tanks came over the ridge, the retreating diamond scales deployed multispectral smoke, the hull-mounted grenade launchers going off with a pop, producing a veritable wall of smoke. Momentarily safe behind the smoke screen, Stalker called for a company sit rep, the unit commanders coming back one after another with a litany of loss. By Stalker's best estimates, he had lost nearly a third of his company killed or wounded, and the day was far from over. They had now opened up a gap of a few kilometers and were passing back past the hulks of the diamond scales they had lost during the initial charge. Stalker guessed they were still over 15 kilometers from the reforming front line, and, according to the TACnet, most units had now disengaged and were falling back. Stalker's concentration was broken as a brilliant blast of light flashed across the plain and smashed into a diamond scale. The rail shot penetrated the turret and killed the vehicle commander, but fortunately didn't hit the mechanicals or crew compartment, and the IFE rolled on. Through the smoke screen, a line of Deimos gravity tanks emerged and began to fire on the fleeing diamond scales. Stalker swore the IFEs were out of missiles and the gravity tanks were now out of effective pulse rifle range. The IFEs popped the last of their smoke and jinked, hoping throw of the tank's aim, but it was an uneven contest. Stalker watched helplessly slumped in the observer position while being thrown around by the jinking diamond scale, completely out of ideas. There was simply nothing he could do. In moments he would be dead, along with his entire command. Suddenly the entire horizon seemed to light up. A series of explosions rippled across the leading Deimos tanks, the fireballs merging into one solid wall of destruction. Stalker looked upwards and saw a flight of dark stars moving high and fast. He also could just make out a flight of 12 HTTs. As he was watching the HTT flight, something large and round suddenly detached from each transport and began to fall. As Stalker watched in amazement, the large objects suddenly unfolded and their identity was revealed. High above a dozen midnight black striders were plummeting to Earth. The falling striders looked like massive black insects as they fell against the pale sky. They fell at near terminal speed, and for a moment Stalker thought they would crash. But as the ground rushed up to meet them, their ion thrusters suddenly flared bright and small chutes deployed. As they touched down, the chutes fell away, and each nimbly sped off, gliding easily with their ion thrusters over the open terrain. Almost as soon as they were underway, each strider loosed 2 missiles from large shoulder pods. The missiles streaked away with blinding speed, covering the distance to the Deimos formations in seconds and smashing into several of the leading gravity tanks that had survived the airstrike. The Strider formation did a coordinated about turn and headed back towards the battered diamond scales. As they drew closer, Stalker recognized them. They were Night Pattern Striders. Developed after the large-scale armored battles on Mars from the standard Griffin pattern close combat Strider used by the assault divisions, the Night Pattern Strider was a dedicated anti-armor variant. Standing taller than a Griffin and looking quite bulkier, the Night Pattern was armed with 6 of the latest version of the powerful Hellstrike anti-armor missile in 2 tri-missile pods, 1 on each shoulder weapons mount. They were also armed with a compact railgun, which had been developed from the much more powerful weapons carried by Mecha. Their secondary weapon was a powerful 40mm grenade launcher, which could disable or blind armored vehicles with EMP rounds, leaving them easy prey for the hunters. This is Templar 6-0, looking for Alpha 2-1. I read you 5x5 Templar, you're a beautiful sight. Glad to see you're in one piece 2-1. Exfil to the southeast, we will cover you. All receive Templar, watch those gravity tanks, they pack a punch, 2-1 out. Like a flock of birds, the Striders fluidly reversed their formation and headed back towards the Deimos lines.